Okay, it's 48 hours later, our paper is dry and it's ready to use. So let's move into our demonstration bit of the workshop. The first demonstration I want to do is on toning. Now, toning is the process of applying graphite onto our paper. The toning process involves all our graphite tools. This is all the graphite in all its forms that I mentioned in the first part of this video. This involves our pencils, our mechanical pencils, our graphite sticks, our graphite powders, and so forth. And now I would love to demonstrate to you how our graphite products translate onto the paper in many different ways. Let's start off with the humble pencil. Okay, I'm going to start rubbing my pencil on the paper. I'm going to start with an 8B and just scrub it on the paper to show you the different ways that you can tone with a pencil. As I'm scrubbing the pencil across the paper, you'll notice that as I'm going, the texture is changing from very solid into a more rough texture as I'm going. This is happening because the tip of my pencil is going blunt. And as it's going blunt, the surface area that slides across the paper is increasing. And that is why the texture of the paper is coming through, because technically it is filling less of the paper's grain. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the H pencil to show you the difference it makes on the paper. As I'm scrubbing the H pencil, you'll immediately notice that it's a lot more liney. It's obviously going to be a lot lighter because it is a light pencil. I'm using a 6H, but that hard tip is not going blunt as fast as the B pencil is. The finish on the paper is a lot more inconsistent and a lot more liney. Now we can clearly see the difference between a B pencil and an H pencil. Now obviously these are the extremes of both sides. The dark one is the 8B and the light one is the 6H. Now there is a whole range of pencils in between. Now you can imagine using the whole range of pencils, you're going to achieve a whole range of tonal values and textures on your page. I'm going to take a B pencil and do the same thing, just so that you can kind of get a middle point between the highest B and the highest H. This will give you a much better idea of the impact of the pencil grade you choose. Okay, now we can clearly see that there's a couple of textures forming on our page here. And the larger that surface area gets, the more texture your page is going to give. I want to show a sample using the graphite stick that has a very large surface area and what the effect of that large surface area will be. I'm going to rub my graphite stick on the widest side across my page, and then you'll immediately notice that it's giving me a lot more texture than my fine tip pencil does. This is a clear indication that the larger the surface area is that slides across your page, the more texture you're going to achieve. Now let's try the same thing with a finer tip. I'm going to switch to my mechanical pencil, which has a very tiny tip, and I'm going to show you the effect of the small tip on paper. So the lead in this mechanical pencil is a 4B lead, meaning it's very soft. That's why I'm able to put the graphite down so easily with it. Now, because the mechanical pencil's point is not going as blunt as your normal pencil, I'm able to use that fine point to fill the grooves of the paper much more, resulting in much less texture and a much nicer finish. We can already start seeing on our paper that just by using 5 different pencils and 5 different graphite products, I have a whole variety of tonal values and textures forming. Next, I'd love to show you how we can use this fundamental of graphite and paper in combination with each other to manipulate the textures on our paper. But before I do that, I quickly want to show you what I've got here is a hot pressed, cold pressed and rough piece of paper, and I'd love to show you the effect the tooth makes on the toning process. Okay, so I'm just going to use my mechanical pencil again with a 4B lead and just scrub a little on each paper to show you the difference. Let's start with the hot pressed paper. As I'm scrubbing along the hot pressed paper, you'll see that there's almost no texture forming. That is because of the paper's very smooth surface area. As I'm moving down to the cold pressed paper, and I do the same work, you'll immediately notice that there's already a lot more texture coming through. And on the rough paper, you'll notice that the texture gets a lot worse. Now let's move back, and I would love to show you how you can use these tools in combination with each other to manipulate and have a little bit more control over your textures on paper. I'm going to go to the very rough section that we created with our graphite stick, and I'm going to use my mechanical pencil and show you the fill-in technique to manipulate the texture on your paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the fine point of the mechanical pencil and work that fine point into the little white areas of this textured section. That will allow me to fill all the white spots. And you'll immediately notice that I'm already getting a different kind of texture just by filling in the white spots. Those white spots are basically the deepest holes of the paper, and the darker spots is the higher points of the paper's grain. So when you rub the graphite across the surface, and it's a very large surface area, the graphite only catches these highest points of the paper. So it only darkens the highest points and it doesn't fill the lower points. Using my thinner point, I can now fill those lower points with graphite, hence changing my texture. So this fill-in technique is a great way to manipulate your textures. All right, now I want to show you the same technique, how you can manipulate the tonal values but retain the texture. Let's say you have your high points are very dark, your low points are very bright, but you want to change that tonal value of that section a little bit darker, but you want that texture to remain. So then you have to switch to a lighter pencil and do the same technique with a lighter pencil. Now I'm going to fill my white spots with a B pencil, and you'll notice that the texture remains, but the overall tonal value is going slightly darker. So you have a full range of pencils and a full range of papers to choose from, and the combination of these puts you in control to create any type of tone values and textures that you desire. Next, I'd love to show you how to tone with other graphite products. Let's go back to the graphite stick. Now I'm going to use my graphite stick and a little knife, and I'm going to scrape some powder directly onto my paper. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my makeup sponges, and I'm going to work this powder into my paper. Now, because of the pigments being loose little particles, it is much easier to work the graphite deep into our paper's grain, and this gives you a really nice, elegant, velvety finish. By applying less pressure to the sponge, I can also achieve different levels of tonal values. Now, because of this sponge being so soft, it translates onto our paper, giving us very soft textures. Now let's try the same toning technique using a brush. Now I'm going to take my brush and a little bit of graphite powder, and I'm going to dip my brush into the graphite powder and then start toning with the brush. Using a brush gives you a little bit more control over the area you're working in. Because of its fine tip, you're able to work in much smaller areas than the makeup sponge. Now the tip of the brush is also very soft, so obviously it's going to result in a very soft texture on your paper. Using less pressure is also going to give you a variation in tonal values. The more graphite you apply, the darker that area is going to go. Now you can use both of these techniques, whether it's the sponge or the brush, to achieve very light, subtle tonal values with soft texture, or create pitch deep black textures on your paper. Earlier in the video, I spoke about graphite's natural reflectivity. Now, we also mentioned that prepping your paper the correct way helps to eliminate that reflectivity. However, you have to do your toning process correctly as well to get the best results. I'm going to show you the correct way to tone on a prepped paper to achieve those nice deep solid blacks. And I'm also going to show you the common mistakes people make with this toning process and why that shine comes through sometimes. So I'm going to start off with my 8B pencil, and I'm going to show you the wrong way of doing this. As I'm rubbing my 8B pencil over the page, that point is going blunt. And that flat point is putting a layer of graphite onto the paper. Now, in order for me to get the blackest results, I need to press harder and harder, and that causes the paper to go flat. I'm literally eliminating the paper's tooth. The graphite is layering on top of itself, creating a really thick layer of graphite on top of the page. And that is why the light reflects off of it. So instead of using a pencil, it's a much better idea to use your graphite stick or your powders, because that enables you to work the fine powder and the pigment deep into your paper. This avoids the paper's tooth from getting damaged, and it fills the paper much deeper with a black pigment. And that's going to give you much less reflection. So the combination of your prep paper with those little fibers standing up, absorbing the light, and the pigment being worked deep into your paper gives you a really nice, deep, glare-free black. But sometimes in a drawing, we have very small and confined spaces that requires a very deep black toning. So using a makeup sponge isn't really practical in that scenario. So I'm going to switch to my mechanical pencil now, once again with my 4B lead in it, and I'm going to use that fine tip to my advantage and work the graphite pigment finely into my paper to avoid the glare. Okay, so while I'm doing this, there's tiny little particles forming on the top layer of the paper, and you can just gently use your finger and rub those particles in to finish it off. So why are blacks so important? I want to switch over to the blending techniques, and I want to explain to you how we use our black areas to effectively shape our drawing. I'm going to use a whole range of new pencils to create a few marks of different tonal values on our paper. I'm going to start with an 8B and work my way down. Then I'm going to switch to a 5B. Then I'm going to switch to a B, a 2H, and a 6H. And now we have a whole range of tonal values as we go down. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my blending stump and just my darkest value of pencil to create the same range of values with a combination of techniques. So I'm going to apply my darkest graphite using my mechanical pencil with a 4B lead. And I'm going to try and get it as dark as possible. And then using my blending stump, I'm going to manipulate this area and spread this graphite across a larger area. And as I go down, I'm going to use less pressure. And this allows me to achieve a whole range of tonal values by just using one pencil and a blending technique. This little demonstration gives you a good idea of what is possible when you start mixing techniques. It also shows you the role that blending plays in the drawing process. Now, where toning was the process of applying graphite on the paper, blending is the process of manipulating that graphite. Now, we have a whole range of blending tools that we can use to manipulate graphite in many different ways. Let's go back to our toning section, and I'm going to show you how we can manipulate the toning that we've already done using different blending tools. Let's start off with our blending stump. Now, if I scrub my stump across this area, it kind of mixes all that graphite together, and it kind of gives us a brand new look. Makes everything smooth and a lot darker. Now we need to be very careful of the blending process. What is happening there is all that graphite on the paper are being mixed together. So that obviously changes the texture and the appearance, but it also makes everything darker and it makes everything look the same. And this kind of gives you an idea of how dangerous blending also can be, because when everything looks the same, you're going to lose contrast in your drawing and you're going to lose depth in your drawing. So the blending process does involve a little bit of planning. Let me demonstrate the kind of planning that I'm talking about. Here we have two identical blocks, and in the first block I'm going to use my 4B mechanical pencil and I'm going to try and create a gradient from dark to light by using just the pencil. Now, by using just the pencil, I'm obviously going to get a little bit of texture on my paper. So now I can use my blending stump to remove that texture and make everything smooth. But the thing that is happening here is I've added so much graphite on this drawing, and as soon as I start blending, it's mixing all that graphite together. And the result is that entire block is going a lot darker. I'm kind of losing the contrast between my dark section and my white lighter section at the bottom. So this kind of tells you that you kind of need to do some planning before you start blending. In my next block, I'm only going to add my darkest area of that gradient. I'm going to fill the top corner of the block and try and get it as dark as possible. And that should be enough graphite to create a gradient across that whole block by using my blending stump. Now I'm going to start in the dark area and I'm going to work the graphite down, and using less pressure I'm just going to create a nice dark to light gradient. This gives me a lot more control over that whole area, ensuring that my darker area and my whiter area has enough contrast between them, giving me a lot more depth and a lot more contrast. Now, we don't always have to apply graphite on the paper before we start blending. As our blending stumps get used, the tip of these stumps gets filled with pigment, with graphite pigment. And if you require a really light section in your drawing, you can just use this blending stump as is with the dirty tip, and you will already get some graphite on the paper. This will be light and it will be very smooth. The same blending techniques can also be applied by other blending tools, such as our makeup sponges and our brushes and blending pens, which is nice because it gives you a hard option and a soft option. Now, that theme of hardness levels that you find in different pencils carries over to blending tools. A harder blending tool, like the stump, is going to give you a rougher texture on paper. Obviously not as rough as a pencil, a lot finer, but it will definitely be rougher than a soft blending tool such as your sponges or your brushes. So why is the blending tool so vital to the drawing process? Well, we use our blending tools to form an undertone. We use undertone to turn a two-dimensional area into a three-dimensional shape. We use undertones to give our subject its shadows and its highlights. We also use undertones to give our subject its color. I'm going to demonstrate this using a little circle on the page here. So when I draw a circle on the paper, I basically have a two-dimensional circle on a flat surface. So as soon as we apply our undertones onto this two-dimensional circle, it turns that circle into a three-dimensional sphere. And I'm just going to apply some shadows onto this circle. And as I'm doing this, you'll start seeing the circle turning from a circle into a sphere. Now, the darkness of this undertone is going to determine the color of your subject. If it was a black ball, the undertone would be very dark. But if it was a white ball, these undertones would be much lighter. So you kind of get an idea now of what role the undertone plays in regards to the shape and the color of your subject. Now, you've probably noticed that the edges of my sphere here isn't very clean, which brings us to the erasing section of the techniques. Now, I'm going to use different erasers and show you the role that each plays in the fine art of graphite pencil drawing. I'm going to grab my block eraser and I'm going to start erasing the edges of this circle to give it a more crisp edge. Now, I've already explained earlier, the problem with block erasers is that it creates all these little residues. So I'm just going to use my little brush here and brush that off. Now obviously this is not ideal because you risk smudging your artwork when you're doing this. So a more effective way might be to use your kneadable eraser and just kind of dab all those little residue away. Okay, so now that our edges has been cleaned, you can immediately see that our subject has a lot more definition than it had before. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a little shadow to the bottom part of the section to complete it. I'm going to use my makeup sponge to do this and just drag that graphite down to give it a slight shadow. And there we go. Now we've turned our two-dimensional circle into a three-dimensional sphere using an undertone. Now, you can obviously get a good idea of why the undertone is so important, but the application of the undertone is also very important to the erasing process. The smoother you can apply this undertone, the better you will be able to lift that graphite off of your page to get certain kind of details. Next, I want to show you how we use our different types of erasers to achieve different types of bright marks and effects. I'm going to first use the kneadable eraser, and I'm going to show you how we can use its moldability to create different types of marks on our paper. First thing, I'm going to create a really sharp tip on our eraser, and I'm going to use this fine tip to create very small little marks. Now, this eraser can be shaped into basically any shape possible. I can even create really sharp edges to pull really sharp lines. I can also create rounded edges and use that rounded edge to dab, just to lift a little bit of the graphite to lighten a certain area. Another interesting way you can use this is you can kind of stamp this eraser onto a certain pattern, and then you can transfer that pattern onto your drawing. When you lift your eraser, it's going to leave an inverted version of that pattern. Now, whenever you want to create more crisp type of details with solid lines, very bright solid lines, you're going to use something like your Tombow Mono 0, which has a very small tip. Now, a little trick I can teach you with this is I love cutting off the edge flat with the steel bar. That leaves you with really sharp edges, and that will allow you to create very, very thin lines. Now, the trick with the Tombow Mono 0 is the harder you press, the thicker line it's going to create. The lighter you press, the thinner that line's going to be. Now, another trick that I can teach you with the Tombow Mono 0 is instead of smudging and trying to create a line with one movement, do more movement and use less pressure. This is going to give you a much more effective erase and a much more cleaner appearance on that white mark. The same effects can be achieved with the pencil eraser. Obviously the tip of this is a little bit more bulky, so you won't probably get effects that fine, but it's a very similar tool and it gives you very similar effects. A nice thing about the eraser pencil is it's got a little bit of a flexibility to that point. So the harder you press, the harder it erases, and the softer you press, the less graphite it lifts. So this allows you to create kind of gradients on your graphite layer. So you can go from white and you can blend that white into your gray seamlessly. Now, there's a whole range of erasers out there that you can choose from to cater to your specific needs. These three techniques, toning, blending, and erasing, all play an equally important role in the process of drawing. But it's the layering of these techniques that really bring your drawing to life. I'm going to show you a small example on this sphere. I'm going to create a small bump using all three techniques and really bring that bump to life. So I'm going to switch to my Tombow Mono 0 and I'm going to use this fine eraser tip to create a little highlight, which is the highlighted section of that bump. And then I'm going to use my mechanical pencil to create the shadow side of the bump. Next, I'm just going to soften my shadow area with a blending stump. And now the combination of the highlight and shadow gives me the illusion of that bump in the sphere. Another factor that plays a big role that's going to make your erased lines really pop is the smoothness of your undertone. The smoother that undertone, the more crisp and the more defined your lines are going to appear. To show you this, I've got a little section here that has a textured undertone and a smooth undertone. And I'm going to erase a line through both of them. You will immediately notice that the line in the textured section and the line in the smooth section are very different. The one in the smooth section is a lot more visible and a lot more clear, a lot more defined. The reason for this is the texture in the textured section breaks the line, and that kind of makes the line fade into the texture. Where in the smooth section, that smoothness of your undertone creates a really defined line across your erased section, making it look a lot more crisp. Another area where your kneadable eraser is very effective is lifting graphite in your darker areas. Now, whenever you lift graphite in a dark area, you want to avoid smudging your eraser. Smudging basically smudges the graphite you lift off, you're smudging it back into the paper. So this creates a really dirty effect on the part that you erased. The better technique to use here is by using the rolling technique. Now you're going to clamp the kneadable eraser between your two fingers, and instead of smudging, you're going to roll your eraser over that section. So what is happening here is this putty is being rolled into the paper and lifted back out again. And once it lifts out, it pulls the graphite out with it. And then because you are doing a rolling effect and pushing down, it's also pushing the dirty graphite to the sides, leaving the center part clean. Now this is very effective, and you can pretty much lift 100% of the graphite from the paper again. Throughout this entire workshop, we learned everything there is to know about graphite as a medium. We went through all the tools available to us as pencil artists, and we learned the fundamentals of pencil drawing. Now it's time to apply those fundamentals onto a real drawing. Using the reference image that you received with this video, I invite you to create a beautiful artwork with me from the comfort of your own home. Let's get started.